Years ago, when they bestowed him with the Order of Luthuli in silver, the presidency praised Popo Molefe for, and I quote, his excellent contribution to the fight against the unjust laws of apartheid, often at times putting his life in danger to ensure freedom for all South Africans, unquote. Now, over the past year, Popo Molefe has been in the news for once again living up to that reputation at the state capture inquiry. He's been credited with fending off at least some of the vultures that circled state-owned passenger rail agency of South Africa, PRASA. Last week, though, President Cyril Ramaphosa poured cold water over some of Molefe's statements, calling them disingenuous. Molefe hasn't taken kindly to the president's comment. Now tonight on the Watchdog, we speak to Popo Molefe about accountability, ethics, good governance, and politics. Later on, we look at Marikana, 9 years post-apartheid, after post-apartheid South Africa's worst tragedy that left 34 men dead and another 60 injured. And after that, find out why I think a president who's just lost an election may just be the most truthful president. That and more coming up. The Watchdog starts now. A very good evening to you. My name is Vuyo Mvogo. Now, last week, President Cyril Ramaphosa appeared before the state capture inquiry. And at some point during the question and answer session, he was asked about a comment or something that Popo Molefe said after visiting the top 6 officials of the ANC, where he had wanted them to actually help him turn things around, deal with the corruption that was happening at PRASA, which Dr. Molefe at the time chaired. And he was asking them to really assist them. Well, this was the response that the gay president gave when a question was asked about whether they actually gave him the support that he wanted.
I find it disingenuous that someone who's a chair of an entity would then say, I am powerless and I need your full and total support. And when he would and should have known that it would be there anyway. And so the question is, he should have gone ahead. He's the chair of the board. When you are chair of the board and you find there's malfeasance, your audit committee must act. Your risk committee must act. And if it affects your CEO, CFO, your HR committee must act. If not, then you use other state agencies.
On a part of a comment that sparked a lot of conversations since President Cyril Ramaphosa made those remarks on Wednesday last week. But tonight, of course, we want to broaden the conversation with Dr. Molefe. We want to talk about accountability broadly, ethics, governance, but also the role of politics in how we run these very important institutions. Dr. Molefe, thanks very much for your time and a very good evening to you.
Good evening, Vuyo.
Well, I'm going to start with that comment that sparked it all. And I mean, you must have been a very busy man. Your telephone must have been ringing over the past few days since the president made that comment. People asking you what you thought of his remarks.
Certainly, the president's remarks have caused me to be very busy. as you correctly point out, that there has been a flurry of phone calls based on what he said. Looking at the president talking on this thing, one could mistake him to be an actor in a movie where he thinks that he's reciting poetry in a theater. The reality is that I went to talk to them believing that as a party that was in government and to which I was loyal as a disciplined member, had a responsibility to make sure that state organs resorting under the government that it was in charge of needed to function in a manner that served the best interests of the South African public, the poor of our country. And PRASA was such a very important vehicle in that regard. And it is something that I would have expected the president to reflect on very seriously than behaving like a movie star. The ANC, led by the president, of course, at that time he was number 2 in government, could not absolve itself from not only responsibility for ensuring that the country is governed properly, but also taking accountability for the failures of that time, for the rampant corruption that was happening under its watch. One can never say that a man who goes there to talk to his party about a problem of that nature could be considered to be acting in a manner that is disingenuous. It suggests that I was insincere, I was dishonest, I was not doing anything that I was saying in an honest manner. And I must say that I feel embarrassed in the extreme and very aggrieved.
Have you been able to communicate that to him in some way?
There's no need for me. He knew that he was not telling the truth. He knew what I said in that meeting. And it was not only in that meeting. I had had many engagements with him on a one-to-one basis. So he's the one who should be embarrassed that he said something that had no substance, that was untruthful. And by now he should have sent somebody to say, tell Comrade Popo that I said that in the heat of the
Okay. It looks like we've got your picture again. Sorry, we lost you for a few seconds there, Dr. Molefe. But what I was going to ask you was, I mean, you now serve as chairperson of another big and very important state-owned company. Transnet. Would it not be proper, you think, to perhaps sort this matter out and get it out of the way, just to, even if it's to establish, whether there is still the level of trust that one assumes there was when you were appointed chairperson of Transnet?
I don't know if the president has decided he doesn't trust me. He will have no basis to do so, by the way, even if he were to choose to do so. For me, I can't say that I would want to engage in some kind of a conversation with a view to teaching the president what language he must use when he's talking about his own comrades. I think by now he knows that he made a fatal mistake in the comments that he made. So I don't know that he thinks I've not crossed swords with him. All that I have sought to do is to uphold the values and ethical standards of the African National Congress and the democratic government that we all are members of and were accountable to at the time. And these values are values that, in a sense, are the principles that guide us in our conduct of governance, in the SOEs, and in the serving the people of our country.
No, it's just that, I mean, at a personal level, I wouldn't, trust a person who I found to have been disingenuous with another and probably bigger responsibility. That's where I was coming from. But just from, I mean, you've now occupied a few of these positions, having to steer these big parastatals in a recognizable direction where they are then able, to deliver to our economy what we expect them to. In your analysis, where did the wheels come off?
Well, I don't know if the wheels went off at any stage. I think the president faced a very difficult situation in his presentation to the State Capture Commission. There are things that happened by omission or commission under his watch with his collective of leadership that was put in power at the conference of Mangaung. And later then he became the deputy president of the country. And because he had no answers for those difficult questions, he had to look for a quick fall boy, and he thought I could be that kind of a creature that you would use as a scapegoat. So and you say that you wouldn't trust a person who's disingenuous. Vuyo, my track record in the struggle for freedom as a leader, whether it was in the Black Consciousness Movement or in the United Democratic Front as the General Secretary, as the Premier of the Northwest Province for 2 terms, and later serving as chairman of Petro SA, AMSCO, as well as PRASA, and now Transnet. No one can point at any action I have taken which one can say was not in the best interest of our people, and it was not in the discharge of the mandate that I was given. So there would be no basis for us for anybody to use the description disingenuous to describe me, because that is not what defines what I am. What defines what I am has been my honesty, has been my uprightness, has been my willingness to take the bull by its horns. Whether it could have been the government of P.W. Porter or at the time of B.J. Foster in 1976, 77, I have always been committed to doing that. I never sought throughout that period to do anything calculated to save my own skin. I place the interests of my people first. And that I will do until the end of time.
Now, when you go back to when you first started taking these responsibilities, what did you find to be problematic? Where did you see the problems in how these state-owned enterprises are being run?
Yeah. Well, let's start off by saying the genesis of most of the problems in the state-owned enterprises is to be found in my party, the African National Congress. There's been many of our leaders and activists there who have found their fingers in the cookie jar. And I remember in my private discussion one time with Madam Mantashi saying, I hope that one day when we open the pots, what pops out would not be heads of the ANC. But unfortunately, that's what has happened. So therefore, when that happens, and these people, some of them sit there in decision-making structures of the party and the government, they find it difficult to act decisively to confront corruption, which they have professed to be fundamentally opposed to.
Why is that?
So that's where the problem is. And because of that problem, then you begin to have happening within these SOEs, interference by politicians who now want those in boards and in executive positions who are pliant and would discharge not the mandate of the institutions, but who would pander to the whims and wishes of those who make decisions, those who have put themselves in a position where they believe they can determine the destiny and the career pathing of individuals who have been appointed by the government or the party that is in power. And this is wrong because when we fought for freedom and we took over power, it was not so that we would use that power for our own personal benefit or material accumulation. At all material times, our involvement and our use of power was intended to serve the best interest of the people we were leading in the country, the poor whose lives needed to be improved qualitatively. That's what we wanted to do. So these were supposed to be instruments, therefore, that advances the cause of the people, not the cause of those in positions of power.
Well, it's often been done in the name of deployment. And other people would argue that you two would not have been, chairperson of PRASA and Transnet and all the other boards you've served in, were it not for the ANC deciding that you should go there.
Oh, well, I suppose the ANC has decided through its government. But in all instances, except perhaps at the time when I became chairman of Armsco and Petro SA, both in PRASA and Transnet, the ANC asked me to come because they had serious problems and they needed somebody they could trust to confront the challenges that were there. They needed somebody with courage, somebody who's honest, somebody who's sincere in dealing with issues. And they asked me to come and deal with the issues. And I confronted the problems. At PRASA, we unraveled the corrupt procurement of locomotives, won the cases in court. PRASA was supposed to follow Stedtler Rail, which is the successor of Vosloo, and get the money back and return the 13 locomotives that they had delivered, even though they had already been paid 2.6 billion. They had delivered only 13 locomotives. To date, PRASA has not done so. The government is saying nothing. They know of the judgment in that case. With regard to Transnet, we're still grappling with the 1064 locomotives, corruptly procured, and the many hands that were found in the cookie jar, in the till, those who got kickbacks from this huge contract. So we're still dealing with that. And we have done remarkable work in that regard. We have established an executive team management that truly is committed to discharging the mandate of Transnet, transforming Transnet, bringing back that glory that defined it as an entity when it was conceptualized and built over the years. So I am saying to you, when I was asked to serve in these entities, I was not being done a favor. By the way, I have never believed that my involvement in the struggle for freedom was premised on the fact that there would be a reward to me as a person. The reward for me when I got involved in the struggle would have been the liberation of our people. If in the end I would stand right at the back of the queue of those who now have to claim glory, I would be happy to do so. And this is what has always defined my character and my commitment to the struggle for freedom.
What is your view? How do you see the whole concept of deployment? I mean, there are people who say that is, in fact, where the problems start. There are others who say, no, there's nothing wrong with the concept of deployment. Governments the world over do that. It's how you do it. And you would have seen last week how difficult, how the president was struggling, himself with this whole concept, because, at times, they didn't know who was coming or not coming before the deployment committee, who was deployed at ESCOM and, who wasn't, what criteria was being used, how did you evaluate these people's performance, and so just your view. What's your view on the whole concept of deployment?
Well, there's fundamentally nothing wrong with deployment. The concept of deployment was necessary, was imperative when we defeated apartheid and we needed to change both government and society. Remember, we became government at the time when the entire civil service was a civil service tutored in policies of apartheid, steeped in those policies and ethos of apartheid. There was no way in which the ANC, whether it became part of government of national unity or on its own later on, could govern the country relying on a civil service whose values, whose moralities, whose ethics and ethos were not those that are revolutionary and are consonant with the needs of our society. So it was important for the ANC to say, we're going to look amongst ourselves for the best we have trained, who have commitment, who have the skills, and we would ask them to apply for key and strategic positions within the party. And this week, we said so unashamedly in our strategy and tactics that we adopted in 1991 in the conference that was held in the then Natal, in the then Natal. But the deployment was not intended to be exclusively for members of the ANC. We wanted to look for the patriots, the best in our society. And we would integrate these with those who came from the history of apartheid themselves, because we had to change their mindset as well. We had a lot of white Democrats who served with us, whether they would have been in NUSAS or they would have been in Johannesburg Democratic Action Committee, the Cape Democrats, or those who were in Durban Action Committee, and so on. Including those who supported the Black Sash. All of those were people who were fighting against apartheid and committed to the values that the ANC symbolized or personified. And therefore, deployment is proper, it was necessary. But deployment at the time was being done in the interest of the nation, in the interest of the millions of poor people who pinned their hopes on the ANC as the leader of society and a vehicle with capacity to take them to that democratic South Africa of plenty and better life that they believed in. But later on, of course, once some amongst us tasted power, they began to become greedy, and they began to corrupt the system of deployment so that it ceases to serve the nation, but it begins to serve the parochial interests of the greedy amongst ourselves. And they began to make young people, young professionals, believe that the only way in which they can make it in life is when they become skivvies of those who make decisions, when they become cronies of those who dispense with power and their jest for them to get up the ladder. And that did not end there. It began to even interfere with governance, because they began to even make governance instrument, develop governance instruments which served the purpose that has led to the capture of the state, either through your memoranda of incorporation of state-owned companies, board charters of shareholder compacts, which moved the authority from the boards of directors to the executive authorities, to ministers, and deployment committees that would then decide that, notwithstanding the fact that the board might have interviewed people, they would have the right to interfere with who the board says are the best candidates to be appointed. And of course, that goes on to the protocol also that ends up right in the cabinet, cluster committees. The cabinet sits there to consider the names that have been sent by the board. Ideally, the board should be telling the minister, we have interviewed and we have found our best candidate is so and so. But then they get told, no, give us 3 names. Why do you have to give 3 names if you have found your candidate? You give 3 names because they presuppose that they have the prerogative to change what the board wants. They can say, no, we don't want your number 1 candidate or your number 2. We want number 3. So it's a way of trying to show where the locus of power is. The locus of power is with the executive, the politicians, not the board of directors. And the president has the temerity to say, no, they had everything. They had all avenues to do what they needed to do. He can't explain why we have to go through this tedious route that ends up with the cabinet. And in the case of PRASA, which for 5 years could not produce a group chief executive, and probably almost for the same period could not produce a substantive board of directors. So that's the point. I want to repeat that there is fundamentally nothing wrong with the deployment, because the deployment, it gives those who govern the capacity to change the systems in order to achieve the programs. And the programs are those geared towards serving the people, not the programs that are geared towards serving personal interest.
Quick one, Dr. Molefe, one of our viewers asking whether you would accept public nomination for the position of the presidency if the electoral system were to change.
Well, I don't know, but I thought I know how long I have political ambitions. I think there are very many young South Africans, talented, many of whom we groomed in the days of the struggle for freedom and even in the ANC. It is their outspokenness that has resulted in them being marginalized. And I think it's them who must be given that opportunity.
Anyone's in mind?
No. You know, one of them is who? The guy who gave evidence at the commission, Tamba Masep, is one of those great guys. Well, he's younger than me, but he's there now in the government. The current minister of health, he's been a great leader. There are many. You have Ibrahim Rasool. You have what is his name now? Paul Mashatile. You have that. There are many. There are many such, and there are women as well in this grouping. It's just that I've never had to think about who would be a president, but the ANC would not struggle to find them.
That's where we're going to leave it this evening. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Popo Molefe is the chairperson of the board of Transnet, previously chairperson of the board of PRASA, and of course several other state-owned entities before then. Time to take a quick ad break. When we return, we revisit Marikana 9 years on as the country marks the anniversary of the massacre on the Gopi. Stay with us.
Mpumalanga, popular for its beautiful scenery. This is where the sun rises. From our offices in Bombela, our team travels across the province, covering news just for you. We bring you stories across borders of Eswatini and Mozambique, priding ourselves with the Kruger National Park.
Sometimes it's not easy to get an interview, but we make sure that we come back with a story. We make sure we cover this province from corner to corner and with diverse voices.
From the province also rich with minerals, we'll keep you informed. SABC News, independent, impartial.
Welcome back. Mine Workers Union AMCU says there's been no reply, I should say, to 2 letters to President Cyril Ramaphosa to accelerate compensation for Marikana victims and their families. Today, the country marks the 9th anniversary of the Marikana tragedy, when 34 miners died in a hail of police bullets. AMCU says the families of the deceased have not yet found closure.
Growing calls to government to do more for affected families.
They might have been killed like dogs on a field, but let me tell you, their dignity has been restored, and you restore it, and we claim it back here today.
And a demand for justice.
9 years on, still no justice. We live in a government that relegates the life of an African to a life that is less than.
It is journalists who need healing, who need closure. For 9 years, has not yet removed their pain.
From a legal standpoint, no one has taken responsibility, and government has dug and dived at every turn and hope that people will forget.
We call on the NPA to prosecute Ramaphosa, and if they are not going to prosecute Ramaphosa, they must issue a non-prosecuting letter as the EFF want to prosecute Ramaphosa through private prosecution.
While the families are still struggling to come to terms, they say no one has been held accountable and want the 16th of August to be declared a public holiday.
In Marikana, where the incident happened, the area is still underdeveloped, and on the Kopi where our loved ones died, nothing shows the remembrance of the lives that were lost there.
I'm pleading with the families not to lose hope, because what happened was a tragedy that never should have happened.
The Marikana Family Trust says they will support all the affected families, while the injured mine workers who received their payments want to set aside about 1 million rand to challenge government and lawmen for further compensation.
The government accepted liability and of their wrongdoing in 2016 already. It's now 5 years later. They still haven't compensated the people. People are dying. People are getting old. Some have gone back to the rural areas. We even struggle to reach them. There's COVID-19 now. We fear that we might lose even more people. So even when that compensation comes, it might be meaningless to some of the people.
We are calling for the government to incorporate the mining charter into MPRDA. Once the mining charter is incorporated into an MPRDA, that will change the form of the communities around these mines. As it stands, it's just a code of good practice. It does not have any recourse in law. So they do as they feel, when they like. If they don't like, they don't comply. Hence, you still see Marikana, Nkaneng as it is today, because the social labor plan is becoming a good practice for them. But if it was law, if it was regulated, I'm telling you, those mining companies would have changed the livelihood of the community of Marikana.
Meanwhile, the Socio-Economic Rights Institute is calling for former National Police Commissioner Ria Pierga to be prosecuted. This after she lost a court bid to set aside the findings of the Farlam Commission.
The understanding was the reference to files were the...
Well, let's speak now to the Executive Director of the Benchmarks Foundation, John Caper. John, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. Your organization has been monitoring developments for many years now, and listening to the speakers who were at the memorial service, I mean, most of them leaders of political parties, everyone was complaining about things that have not been done or promises that have not been delivered on. What has been your assessment?
Well, yes, I think, we're looking at a period of 9 years now after Marikana, and very little has been done, even in terms of compensation, in terms of the company's role in causing this massacre by criminalizing the workers, and making as if this was a big criminal element and not a labour issue, and justice needs to be done in that regard. Compensation, yes, it is late, but it's not that late, and it still needs to take place. I believe with the widows and orphans, the injured, the psychological damages in the community, and a huge sort of interventions in these communities that try to improve lives. And I'm going to be getting towards the 10th memorial, and we hope that some justice will have been done, and also including the higher ranking officials, who are responsible for this massacre.
Let's start with the company itself now, Sibanye Stillwater.
Yes.
Who have been insisting, especially over the past couple of days, that their commitment remains. And you issued a statement at the weekend saying you will be, you will be monitoring them to make sure that they deliver on those promises. Have you been able to ascertain as to why they have not been doing so or done so up until now?
Well, I mean, they have made some commitments, and I think the first thing is with the widows and to build houses for the widows. But Amkert built a few, and they've taken that over. And they said they tarred the road in Kaneng. That doesn't mean that they've done enough, okay? And that they've used some pipe water going directly to minority communities. And all of this needs to be verified. And they're talking about a renewal program around social cohesion, with tangible projects and a bottom-up sort of approach to this, not dictating. And I think they're trying to do more than London ever did. I think that's the only point. But I mean, it's such a massive area, and there's so many issues and problems that need to be dealt with after this massacre, from the level of our democracy as well, and within our political system and criminal system, that we also need to get right. But London, I believe, as a corporation, owe a responsibility to compensate the widows and orphans and those injured in some form or matter.
Well, of course, I mean, the other issue you are raising is that of, police officers. Still no one has been held responsible. Your assessment of why that is?
Well, I mean, I don't think anyone wants to get to the root of all of this. Because at the end of the day, there might be really important figures involved, and that it might not, be in the interests of certain political groupings. And I think that this is a problem, because I think we do need justice to be served, and the way these workers were killed and shot in the back, and the way the leader Montash was taken out from a helicopter after very much Chairman Joe Siorka, who was there that day. I think that justice, has not yet been done.
Mm-hmm. Just briefly on the compensation issue, was apparently both Sibanye Stillwater and the government are guilty, or at least certainly from where many people see it, of being slow, very tardy in ensuring that compensation reaches the people it is supposed to. Have you been able to put a finger on it as to why that is?
Yes. I mean, I don't know. I haven't been able to put a finger on that. But I somehow suspect they're aware of these issues, and that's why they started some of these bigger initiatives and are beginning to start some. But they need to be monitored to really see how they impact and benefit. So this is, I think this is a company at the moment that we should watch. They've been there 2 years, and it's a very short period of time in regard to the COVID thing. But we should watch and see what they do.
Okay, that's where we're going to leave it. Thanks very much for your time this evening, John Caper, who is the Executive Director of the Benchmarks Foundation, an organization that has been monitoring developments in Marikana. from back 9 years ago when that tragedy actually took place. Meanwhile, the chairperson of the Justice for Minors campaign, Bishop Joe Sioka, says that they are also complaining about the lack of progress in Marikana. Those who are supposed to deliver the services that John Caper was talking about aren't really as forthcoming as they should. Take a listen to him in a conversation earlier with one of our sister shows.
I was there when it actually happened myself. I subsequently called Ramaphosa, and trust me, he said it to me via the phone after Jeff Hadeb had assisted me to reach out to him, that, Bishop, we cannot do anything to help these people. They are criminals. They must be treated as criminals. Now, I can't forget that because I know who Cyril is. I have worked with him before when I was a priest in Soweto. What he said was just beyond my understanding. I still wish he could come and say to me, look, can you assist? Take me to Marikana. Let me engage with the community there. Let me talk to the widows or ask, what can we do to heal the wounds, to heal the memories of the people whose husbands, whose parents were sacrificed on that particular day.
Bishop Sioka, who has also been with Marikana families since. Now, an Eastern Cape-based family who lost their son during the Marikana massacre is still coming to terms with his death. Tebisile Yawa, who was aged 23, was the youngest among the 34 mine workers that were gunned down on this day 9 years ago. His father, Andile Yawa, says he is disappointed that President Cyril Ramaphosa still hasn't been to Marikana despite having made a promise to do so back in 2018. SABC's Abongile Yankis and camera person Vuyokazi Funani have that story.
As we commemorate the Marikana massacre today, families are still feeling the pain of the deaths of their loved ones. Tebisile Yawa was one of the youngest who were killed, who were gunned down by police during that day. With me, I do have his family, his mother and father, Utata Andile Yawa. Tata, a very good day to you. Olusuku luthetha ukuthini kunini lusapho?
Olusuku ukuthi lusuku esiyesive kabuhlungu kakhulu ngalo kangangoba siyaziphelelwa nangamandla kubona ezigusha zingakhutshwanga nje nalamatakana ngoba ndizivele ngenamandla wokuba ndingakwazi uzityhala ndizisedlelweni ngoba ndizukwazi uyozinqanda singathi uba ndikhe ndahamba umgama omde andinawukwazi ubuya kaba lo mama ukawundilanda ngapha ndiphelelwe ngamandla funeka uba makandiphathele ukutya ayondiphakamisa ngapha ndiphelelwe ngamandla ngoba loo ndinyuke yiswekile nesifuba libuhlungu kakhulu ukuthi lisuku.
Unyanakho tata uthi ubana beyintsika yekhaya ezama ukuncedisa ukugxotha ikati eziko nangotya beyophangela phayana ibizinjongo zakhe ezobana makaphuhlise ikhaya. Ngoku tata engasekhoyo ubomi bunjani?
Ibhodi butshintsha kakhulu ubomi sasasa. Ubomi butshintsha kakhulu kuba lo ngoku akukho mntu uze kube kwisenti ndifumana imali kuba ndipeya le pay yobudala uze kube kwimalana esiyifumanayo siye kwagqirha ngezomali iphele kona uhlupheka ngoku siyasokola kwicala lemali nokuba besinolufumana uncedo njengela hlobo ke andazi noba ndiyagabadelana imine ayithembise ngalo aba njengoba abantu babesilwela la 12,000 no at least ngenyanga sifumane la mali sikwazi kaloku ukondla abantwana sinabo bashiyekile ngoba lokhu yayingulomntana owayesebenzela ekhaya
umongameli Cyril Ramaphosa wathembisa ukuya phayana xeshikweni sayingumncwabo kamama uWinnie Madikizela kuna namhlanje akakaye eniphatha njani lonto nezintsapho
isiphatha kabuhlungu lanto umongameli amane esenza iziculelo nezinto zokudlala ngoba ngoku uthi xa efuna ukulungelwa kwezindawo zabo zepolitiki athethe ngento yaseMarikana kodwa angayihoyi kungabi khona nto ayenzayo ngalonto emveni kokwathule cwaka isiphatha kabuhlungu lonto kakhulu nangoku azahamba ucela ixolo kwabantwaneni baserhini esikolweni ayeke ukuza kuthi emakhaya kodwa uyasazi uba sihlala apha isiphatha kabuhlungu indima kamongameli kakhulu kongasihloniphi nosikhathalela
unyanakho tata ngowena zaye mncinci phayana neminyaka 823 inkumbulo nazo wena ngonyana wakho sinkumbulo onothi zinjani
yo bhuti zinzima kakhulu ndandilinyelwa ngulo mntana endigawulela endenzela amathanga uyabona jonga kungamabhodlo apha ubijongile ujonga apha jonga kubuye ngezikhathi babuye ngamahlathi intako zama umntana mayesenza yonke into njengomntana ndingamthume sebenza umntanami kakhulu yonke into apha phakathi kwekhaya ndiphumule kodwa kwathi mhla wemka ndiyasokola tata umzwami uyawa sabuya singenanto sinoyichazela zintsapho ekomishini into esiyibonayo kwakudlalwa njena ngathi qha abantu besithobana bezityela nje imali ngale ngxaki yethu akho nto zabuya nazo iphethe kwikomishini ngoba ke kubantu ababesoleka kodwa kwapolisa labanjwayo akukho mntu wajutshiswayo kwaze kwangcungcuthekiswa kwabasebenzi bebelela amalungelo wabo uloni mini yena usikhumbula xa kuzawufikela isuku xa kusondela i-16 uloni mini uyaqala sikhumbula athethe nathi apha phakathi nenyanga uvela loni mini uthetha nawe uamkho yena uyanxibelelana nathi kangangoba wakwazama nosincediswa sinika i-12,000 inyanga ndicinga uba zaba ntathu esinika i-12,500 uamkho esithi noko uzama uncedisana nathi
ingaba kwanela oko tata
akwanelanga ngoba ke yonke loo nto leyo ayenzi njengokuba abantwana bethu nabadodo abafazi bebephila eyona nto indivisa ubuhlungu kakhulu ngabafazi basetyenziswa emigodini pha imizi yabo yawa nabantwana babo ababakhulisi ngokwabo baziziculela uzawuphela umsebenzi wemayini bazawubuya babheke phi imizi yabo njengomisiwa nje yiyo le mayini bafake emngxunyeni pha mna bhuti msasazi akusekho yam mna ndisazijongelanga nto oko nje ndathi ndaphulukana nalo nyana wam lo andisayiboni kwandlela ngoba ke into uphila ukuhlupheka uphila unesingqala so umntanakho kube urhulumente nemayini leyo iqesha umntanakho ingenzi ngokwaneleyo qha ke izithembiso ziyabekwa kodwa zingenziwa hayi bhuti phila kabuhlungu mna qithi kawuba nje umuntu ndiva nje nawe ndiminxe sisifuba neswekile ngafana kusasa mna
siyabulela xesha. Well, that was Andy Leyawa, whose son Cebisile died during the Marikana massacre. Part of the things he says his health is deteriorating when he thinks about this day. He says his son had big plans for the family and had planned to make sure that the family is well taken care of. He left behind an infant, and now they're saying that more needs to be done. He also expressed disappointment against President Cyril Ramaphosa for not yet visiting the site where the massacre took place. Back to you in studio.
May all their souls rest in peace. And that's all we had for you this evening. Do join us again tomorrow evening, 8 o'clock sharp. For me and the rest of the Watchdog team, have a good night.
Sinombuzo ke size families esubhekisa kumongameli welizwe uTata Ramaphosa. Kodwa kube nini ungasikwa yimfesane ngenxa yefamilies? Kodwa kube nini ungasikwa yimfesane ngenxa yabantwana bethu? Kodwa kube nini mongameli ungasikwa yimfesane ngenxa yabasebenzi? Kodwa kube nini mongameli welizwe ungasikwa imfesane ngenxa yeMarikana yonke? Ngoba eMarikana apho kwenzeka khona esisiganeko kumdaka kuphathile, eKopini apho kwafela khona amadoda angamashumi onke akukho nento ebonisayo. Imiphefumlo yabayeni bethu ayiphumlanga, inyathelwa ngabantu, inyathelwa imfuyo. Kutheni lento tata ungakukhathaleli kangaka ukufa kwabayeni bethu?
Yeah.